Imagine being 63 years old. You have done everything right. You have worked hard, raised a family, and you are finally ready to retire to Hawaii. The boxes are packed. The dream is right there. And then you get a stomachache that just will not go away. You go to the doctor, expecting maybe an ulcer or a gallstone, but instead, you are handed a death sentence: pancreatic adenocarcinoma. The survival rate is brutal. Most people are gone within a year. This is exactly what happened to a woman named Claire Haser. Her doctors told her that her only chance, her one single shot at survival, was a massive, disfiguring surgery called the Whipple procedure. And even then, her odds were 5%. 5%! Claire looked at those odds, looked at the quality of life she would have left, and she did something shocking. She said no. She went home to die on her own terms. 5 years later, she went back to the hospital for something completely unrelated. The doctors did a scan, and they froze. The tumor was gone, not shrunk, gone. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today, we are unpacking a book that challenges everything we think we know about terminal illness. It is called Cured: The Life-Changing Science of Spontaneous Healing by Dr. Jeffrey Rediger.
That is an absolutely wild way to start. I mean, we hear these stories occasionally, right? You see a headline in a tabloid or hear a rumor about someone's aunt who drank carrot juice and cured her cancer, and honestly, I usually roll my eyes. It sounds like false hope. It sounds dangerous. But what makes this book different, and why I was actually willing to read it, is who wrote it. Jeffrey Rediger isn't some guru selling supplements on the internet. He is a faculty member at Harvard Medical School. He is the medical director at McLean Hospital. He has a Master of Divinity from Princeton. This is a guy deeply embedded in the most prestigious, rigorous institutions of Western medicine. And yet, he spent 17 years hunting down these medical miracles. So, Sarah, my first question is, why? Why would a guy with those credentials risk his reputation chasing ghost stories? Because that is what these are usually considered in medicine, right? Flukes?
Exactly, Alex, and that is the core tension of the book. In medicine, these cases are called spontaneous remissions, but they are almost always dismissed. Rediger uses this brilliant analogy. He talks about the long jump record set by Bob Beamon in the 1968 Olympics. Beamon jumped so far over 29 feet that he actually jumped past the optical measuring device. It was called the leap of the century. Now, when that happened, sports scientists didn't say, "Oh, that's a fluke, let's ignore it." No, they analyzed his stride, his muscle density, the wind speed. They wanted to know how a human being could do that so they could teach others. But in medicine, when someone like Claire Haser survives an unsurvivable cancer, we do the opposite. We call it a fluke. We say the pathology report must have been wrong. We ignore the data points that don't fit the curve. Rediger realized that by ignoring these outliers, we are ignoring the most valuable data we have. These aren't flukes. They are the gold standard of what the human body is capable of. He wanted to reverse engineer the Beamon leap of health.
Okay, so he decides to study the outliers. But how rare are we talking here? Because in the book, he mentions a statistic he learned in medical school that spontaneous remission happens in maybe 1 out of every 100,000 cases. If it is that rare, is it really studyable? It feels like trying to study why one person wins the lottery. You cannot really replicate that. But then he digs into that number. And this part really surprised me. He found out that the 1 in 100,000 statistic was basically made up. It was just a number people repeated until it sounded like a fact. When he actually started looking, he found a database from the Institute of Noetic Sciences that had 3,500 references to spontaneous healing in over 800 medical journals. So these aren't unicorns. They are happening. We are just not counting them because we do not have a box to put them in.
Right, and that realization sent him on a journey that actually started with a nurse named Nikki. She had pancreatic cancer, went to Brazil to see a healer, and came back in remission. Rediger was skeptical, but he was curious enough to go to Brazil himself. Now, I want to be very clear here, and the book is very clear. This is not about a specific healer. In fact, the healer he visited, John of God, later turned out to be a horrific criminal involved in terrible abuse. Rediger addresses that head-on. He is not endorsing the guru. What he was interested in was the environment. He saw people with documented terminal illnesses, brain tumors, aggressive cancers who were getting better. He realized that while the healer might be a distraction, the process times the patients were undergoing was real. It wasn't magic. It was a radical restructuring of their lives. He realized that spontaneous remission isn't spontaneous at all. It is caused. We just haven't identified the cause yet because we are looking at the wrong things. We are looking for a pill, but these people changed their entire existence.
That is a crucial distinction. It is not about the magic hands of a healer, it is about the conditions of the body. And this leads us to the first deep dive, the immune system. Rediger goes back in history to a guy named William Coley in the 1890s. This story is fascinating. Coley had a patient, Bessie Dashiell, who died of bone cancer. He was devastated. He looked through hospital records and found a similar case where a guy survived. The difference? The survivor had a massive post-surgical infection. He had a raging fever, and the tumor disappeared. Coley hypothesized that the infection revved up the immune system so intensely that it not only killed the bacteria, but also ate the cancer. He actually started injecting people with bacteria, Coley's toxins, to induce fevers. And it worked! He cured people! But then radiation came along, which was cleaner and easier to standardize, and we completely forgot about using the immune system. We chose to burn the cancer out instead of waking up the body's own army.
And that decision to focus on external treatments like radiation, rather than internal power like the immune system, defined the next century of medicine. Rediger uses a powerful metaphor here. He says modern medicine is like a line of ambulances parked at the bottom of a cliff. We are amazing at catching people once they fall. We can do trauma surgery. We can blast tumors, but we have no guardrails at the top of the cliff. Spontaneous remission is about building those guardrails. It is about the terrain. This goes back to a famous rivalry between Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp. Pasteur said germs cause disease. Béchamp said, no, the germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. Meaning, if your body, your soil is healthy, the germ cannot take root. Pasteur won that argument historically. We spent 100 years killing germs with antibiotics and chemotherapy. But Rediger argues we need to go back to Béchamp. We need to tend the soil, because what he found in these miracle survivors was that they all, in different ways, radically terraformed their own bodies.
I love that ambulance at the bottom of the cliff image. It is so accurate. We wait until we break, and then we try to fix it. But let's talk about how times these people tended their soil, because it wasn't just positive thinking, it was biological. Rediger identifies 4 pillars that kept showing up in these cases: healing the immune system, healing nutrition, healing the stress response, and healing identity. Let's focus on nutrition first, because this is where the book gets into some really specific, actionable stuff. He talks about a guy named Tom Wood. Tom had type 2 diabetes for decades. He was on massive amounts of insulin. He had heart issues. He was basically told, this is progressive. It will only get worse. Here are your meds. Then, almost on a whim, he tries a radical diet change. And when I say radical, I mean nutrient-dense, plant-based, no processed garbage. And the result wasn't just management. He reversed it. His doctor was shocked. She said she had never seen anyone do that in 20 years.
Tom's story is incredible because it defies the standard medical narrative that diabetes is a one-way street. But Rediger goes deeper than just eat your veggies. He brings up tea, Colin Campbell, and the China study. This was a massive epidemiological study that looked at cancer rates across China. It found that counties that ate the most animal protein had the highest rates of Western diseases like cancer and heart disease. The counties that ate a plant-based diet had almost none. But here is the nuance. It isn't just about meat versus plants. It is about nutrient density. In the West, we are overfed but malnourished. We eat food-like substances that are calorie-dense but nutrient-poor. Rediger talks about how our bodies are like high-performance cars. If you put sand in the gas tank, which is essentially what processed food, sugar, and emulsifiers are, the engine doesn't just stop, it degrades. The immune system gets confused. It starts attacking itself or missing the cancer cells it is supposed to kill. The survivors Rediger studied didn't just go on a diet to lose weight, they used food to flood their bodies with the raw materials needed to rebuild their cellular terrain.
And speaking of sand in the gas tank, can we talk about emulsifiers? That part terrified me. These are chemicals added to everything: mayonnaise, ice cream, bread, to make them smooth and shelf stable. Rediger cites studies showing these things strip away the mucus layer in our gut. That layer is our barrier. When it's gone, the gut becomes leaky, toxins get into the bloodstream, and the immune system goes into chronic inflammation mode. And chronic inflammation is basically the match that lights the fire of cancer and autoimmune disease. So, when these patients in Brazil or elsewhere switched to a whole food diet, they weren't just getting vitamins. They were stopping the daily assault on their gut lining. They stopped poking the bear of their own immune system. It makes so much sense why spontaneous healing would happen when you finally stop poisoning yourself 3 times a day.
Precisely. And that leads us to the next pillar, the stress response. And I know, everyone rolls their eyes when you say stress causes illness. We all have stress. But Rediger is talking about the nervous system being stuck in fight or flight. If your body is constantly scanning for threats, whether from a tiger, a bad boss, or unresolved trauma, it shuts down maintenance mode. The immune system is a luxury when you are running for your life. He tells the story of Daniel, a man with testicular cancer that had spread to his lungs. He was given weeks to live. He wanted to die, married, and ordained as a minister. He stopped fighting the idea of death and just focused on love and purpose. He had a profound emotional experience where he felt unconditionally loved, and his tumors melted away. Rediger posits that this shift from fear to love actually flips a biological switch. It moves the nervous system from sympathetic fight or flight to parasympathetic rest and digest. And it is only in rest and digest that the body can actually repair itself.
That story of Daniel is wild because his recovery tracked perfectly with his psychological state. It brings us to the final and maybe most abstract pillar, healing your identity. This is where the book gets really philosophical. Rediger noticed that a lot of these survivors didn't just change what they ate, they changed times who they were *. There is this concept that we all wear masks, false selves we create to please our parents, our spouses, or society. The good girl, the workaholic provider. Rediger argues that maintaining a false self is incredibly draining. It is a massive energy leak. When people get a terminal diagnosis, the mask often cracks. They stop caring what people think. They quit the job they hate, they divorce the toxic partner, they start painting or writing, they become their true self. And Rediger suggests that this authenticity releases a massive amount of energy that the body can then use to heal. It sounds woo-woo, but he links it back to the stress response. Living a lie is the ultimate chronic stressor.
It is not woo-woo if you look at the physiology. We know that the brain and the immune system are physically connected. We used to think they were separate, but we now know there are nerve pathways and receptors on immune cells that listen to our thoughts and feelings. So if your identity is wrapped in shame, fear, or suppression, your immune cells are literally bathing in that chemistry. Rediger talks about how the word incurable is often a description of our ignorance, not the disease. When someone sheds their false identity, they change their internal chemistry. They stop sending the danger signal to their cells. One woman, Mirai, who had metastatic melanoma, described her diagnosis as a wake-up call. Her body was screaming, "I'm done." She had to completely reinvent her relationship with herself. She stopped treating her body like a machine to be driven and started treating it like a partner. And that shift was just as important as the food.
So, we have these 4 pillars: immune system, nutrition, stress, and identity. But here is the skeptical question I have to ask, and I think Rediger handles this well, but I want to hear your take. Is this victim blaming? Because if we say, you can cure yourself by changing your thoughts and diet, does that imply that if you don't get better, it is your fault? Like, you just didn't eat enough kale, or you didn't find your true self hard enough? I worry that people listening might think, oh, I caused my cancer because I was stressed. That seems like a dangerous road to go down. How does the book navigate that line between empowerment and blame?
That is the most important question, Alex. And Rediger is adamant about this. It is absolutely times, not times about blame. illness is complex. Genetics play a role. Environmental toxins we cannot control play a role. You can do everything right and still get sick. You can do everything right and still die. He is not saying these steps guarantee a cure. He is saying they optimize the chances. He talks about improving the odds. If you are playing a game of poker, you cannot control the cards you are dealt, but you can control how you play them. By fixing your nutrition and stress, you are playing your hand as perfectly as possible. And even if a physical cure doesn't happen, the Times Healing Times does. People often report that even if they died, the end of their life was filled with more peace, joy, and authenticity than they ever had before. So, cured in the title doesn't always mean immortality. It means becoming whole. But statistically, playing the hand well does times seem to result in these anomalies more often than we think.
I like that distinction. Healing versus curing. You can be healed whole, at peace, authentic, without necessarily being physically cured, although often the physical cure follows. One thing that struck me towards the end of the book is Rediger's own transformation. He started as this Amish kid, totally isolated, then rebelled into high-tech medicine where he was told, don't ask questions, just memorize the parts. And now he has kind of come full circle to a more holistic view, but backed by science. He talks about how we need to move from a war on disease mentality to a cultivation of health mentality. It is a shift from fighting the darkness to turning on the light. It sounds poetic, but after reading the evidence on the immune system and the microbiome, it feels surprisingly scientific. You don't fight the darkness with a sword, you just turn on the light switch. The immune system times the light switch.
Right. And we need to remember that our bodies are incredibly resilient. They want to heal. We just get in the way. We block the healing with sugar, with stress, with false identities. If we can remove those blocks, the natural intelligence of the body takes over. Rediger shares a quote from his mentor at Princeton that really sums up the whole book for me. The goal is not necessarily to arrive at an absolute answer. The goal is to improve the quality of your questions. For 100 years, we asked, what drug kills this bug? That was a good question, and it saved millions. But now we need to ask a better question. What conditions allow this body to thrive? That is the question that leads to spontaneous remission. That is the question that leads to a true healthcare system instead of a disease management system.
So, for the listener sitting at home, maybe healthy, maybe dealing with a chronic issue, what is the takeaway? You don't have to wait for a terminal diagnosis to apply this. You can start building the guardrails today. Look at your plate. Is it feeding your terrain or poisoning it? Look at your calendar. Is it filled with obligations that drain your soul? Look at your relationships. These aren't just lifestyle tips anymore. They are biological interventions. We have the power to change our internal soil. It is not easy. Changing your diet and your personality is probably harder than taking a pill, but the payoff is a life that is truly alive. Sarah, any final thoughts on Cured?
Just that I hope people read it not as a book of miracles, but as a manual for human potential. We are capable of so much more than we are told. Whether it is Claire Hazer saying no to surgery and yes to life, or Tom Wood reversing his diabetes, the evidence is there. The black box of medical miracles is finally being unpacked, and what is inside is actually very logical. It is love, it is plants, it is truth. It is the basics we forgot. So don't wait until you are falling off the cliff. Build the guardrails now. Thank you for listening to the show. Take care of your terrain, everyone.